our first panel, we have two senior members of the IFOL Education Team to share our outlook on fraud, what we're doing to support finance teams to reduce risk and become anti-fraud accredited. Caroline Adams is the Senior Study Programme Author and Skills Gap Analysis Lead at IFOL, highly experienced shared services leader. She has over 40 years' experience in the industry, leading teams through transformations in a fast-changing environment. So it's good to see you here, Caroline.
Hi, Sue.
Hiya. Garry Stevens is IFOL's lead study programme author. Again, 40 years in the finance industry, including as a financial services manager for a large council and delivering an award-winning transformation project there. Garry joined IFOL in 2021 and delivers webinars, masterclasses and workshops on all aspects of AP and P2P. He also updates and drafts new certification courses for new and existing students. So welcome to you, Garry. Good to see you.
Hi, Sue.
So, fraud on the rise, and the accounts payable function is often the main target, with companies large and small losing huge sums to fraud scams. So before we look at what's happening from our latest research and how IFOL can support you with our latest tools and training, how do you feel about things now? A really quick poll, but if you could join in, that would be great. How confident at the moment are you in your team's ability to detect and prevent financial fraud? Just one answer. A, very confident. You've got strong processes in place. B, somewhat confident. We have some training, but it's limited. Or C, not confident, or we don't have formal fraud prevention training. So let's see how you're doing on that one. Give you a couple more moments, but it's just a quick thing to give us a snapshot. Okay. It's coming along. Thank you for joining in. Gives us a benchmark to start with. And I think we're probably just about there, Caroline and Garry. You can see that.
Yeah.
Certainly can.
So thank you for joining in. That's 57% of you feeling somewhat confident, and you have some training, but you feel it's a bit limited. So that's great to see. So, Caroline, Garry, where do things stand? I know that there's been the latest survey and the results aren't due to be published until the end of the month, so IFOL research. But have you discovered any particular trends? And does what you're seeing from this poll reflect in what's happening in the world?
Do you want me to start, Sue? Yeah.
Yeah,
I think myself and Caroline have had the opportunity to have a sneak preview at the survey results from last year. And having perused the results, there's some positives, but there's also some negatives in terms of some of the areas which are a little bit concerning, to be quite honest. And I mean, the first poll there was touching on training. And I think one of the things that was coming out of our survey last year is there's definitely been a decrease in the number of organisations who feel they're getting regular fraud training. So that is something that I think needs to be addressed in organisations, certainly. You touched on it in your introduction. You know, fraud is getting more complex. Artificial intelligence is now a key driver of that. So, you know, staff really need to be aware in organisations and P2P about these threats and how they can actually deal with them. And we'll touch on some of the other results as we go through the poll. But that's just my initial reactions to the results. They sort of match up with what we've already seen in the 2025 survey.
And the surprising training results could be as a result of the, you know, all business are experiencing increase in costs throughout the differing cost types. And it may be that, you know, the training budgets have been slashed in businesses, which might account for that statistic. But I think the key thing that's, well, you know, none of us are surprised that there's a increase in fraud, because the fraudsters are being increasingly more sophisticated, and it's about how as we as individuals keep up with the differing types of fraud, and more importantly the tools that will prevent the frauds from happening in the first place. And, you know, quite interestingly, businesses are feeling vulnerable And I think that's an interesting one for us. And it's unusual. It hasn't come to the forefront before. The vulnerable, my teeth today, the vulnerability of that aspect. So yeah, increase, not surprising, but it's all about the sophistication and how we keep abreast and ahead, more
Yeah.
importantly, of the differing types of fraud.
Talking about the speed, I mean, you said it's increasing. Was there a big difference between 24, 25? You've been able to see all kinds of research. Do you think things are changing slightly?
I think one of the things that came through is confidence in fraud prevention is actually declining. It went down from 2024. So I think that could be a reflection. Organisations are more aware of the new types of fraud that are potentially affecting them. I mean, as Caroline touched on, that they are getting more sophisticated, particularly the use of AI, as I've already touched on. And I think that gives fraudsters more of an opportunity now to maybe push to get fraud into organizations more frequently than maybe before. So organizations are being hit with much more frequent threats than they used to before. So I think that vulnerability is probably highlighted through that. So
And I
there's
think
definitely a feel of that in the industry.
And I think, Gary, as well, it's about the businesses that are ahead of the game have probably got prevention detection software. And it's about where you are in your automation projects as well. You're going to have business, the gap is widening if you're not investing in the tools to prevent the fraud in the first place. I think we saw that in the statistics as well.
There's quite a high percentage actually that are not organizations are not using AI at all in any spend management processes.
So we've got a workshop later on AI, but how it's good and bad. So you're seeing
Absolutely.
just more and more being used, and people perhaps not realizing that they need to get ahead of the game with some of the similar tools on the good side.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think what I just mentioned there is, AI can be very, very beneficial in the right way. But on the other side of the fence, the frauds are getting more sophisticated because of AI. But I think organizations really, I mean, we touched on budget issues. I think organizations really need to factor in budget now for fraud, particularly for anti-fraud software, AI, just looking at the processes in particular. It was actually good to see that there's still a high percentage of organizations that have segregation for duties when they're P2P. So that's a really key thing that needs to be in place. So that was good.
But some of the new regulations that indeed have hit this year and are coming this year will impact on that as well. So the Economic Crime and Corporate Transparency Act, which is making CFOs more accountable to put risk prevention strategies within the business, that should help with increasing training budgets to allow for continuous training and investment for employees of the business. It will also help people to understand what AI is capable of in a business. And I think a lot of people are a little bit, what's the word? Put the back, they hear the word and they think, oh no, I don't want to know about that. But when you consider an invoice that's coming in to be processed, AI can detect, it can detect patterns, spikes, invoices that have been altered. It can do all sorts, and a human eye can't always detect and prevent these things. So it just prevents so many opportunities, but with that comes risk as well. And I think that's what people are a little bit wary of.
And also the cost. I mean, tough times, but
Cost.
it's not something people should be saving on, is it?
No, definitely not. I mean, if you can think, I mean, a fraud could wipe millions out of a budget of an organization. That could put them under. That's the threats and the risk that they're facing. So it's something that you can't bury your head in the sand anymore because you've not maybe had a fraud. You don't think you've got anything wrong. That's not the
Yeah.
case.
And you mentioned the Act and its iterations that are coming in, the Economic Corporate Crime and Transparency Act. I think someone's asked in the chat for a repeat of that. That's in the UK, of course, but there are regulations in the pipeline in the US as well, aren't there? In all,
Absolutely. I think the US are more organized than we are in this. There's nowhere in the UK where you can go to one site and understand what's going to impact on a business. I think that's quite a key point. Whereas in the US, I believe there's a federal register. Don't quote me on that, but that's what I've been told, which is more advanced than where we are in the UK at the moment. And it's one of the things that IFOL was quite keen on compiling and doing an annual fraud webinar like today, where we will bring in industry experts and do different workshops with anything that's changing or any newness that's coming in regulations. So I think that's quite important as well.
In what you found, Garry, are things just more of the same, or are there actual significant changes in frauds that people should be looking out for? I mean, obviously we know AI is being used, but are there flags that they can look out for?
Well, I think the survey didn't really go into a lot of the detail in terms of the types of fraud that are being the most common ones. But certainly, if you're using fraud detection software, that's a great safety net for you to identify some of those flags that you need to be aware of. I mean, you've got to be aware of not only external fraud, but also internal fraud as well is something that you need to be aware of. So you need to know what your red flags are within your business for identifying potential fraud within the organization.
But what you can ask yourself is, when was the last time you did a health check on your controls, P2P, AP? When was the last time you did a spot audit? When was the last time you looked at who's got access to systems? All these things all form part of your key controls and are the preventers of fraudsters getting into your business. So one of the things I always say to people is do a health check on your controls.
I mean, your vendor master file is one of the key areas that you should be updating, and there was a reasonably high percentage of organisations that never do an update, and that's unbelievable, really.
Yeah.
And also banking details checks. Again, it was a reasonably high percentage, so that's quite worrying.
Okay. So that's a little bit about what the position is now, but how can IFOL help? Let's have a bit of a look at that, some of the tools, some of the things that are happening with us. Another quick poll just to set us off on this part of the discussion. If you would join in, please, everybody. What is your biggest challenge, do you feel, in preventing fraud within your organisation? Lack of formal training for employees? Increasingly sophisticated fraud tactics? Limited internal compliance controls, or budget constraints? If you had to choose just one of those that you think's really setting you on the back foot: lack of formal training for employees, increasingly sophisticated fraud tactics, limited internal compliance controls, or budget constraints. Okay, I think that looks like a clear response there. and shows the position people feel they're in, that the fraudsters are increasingly sophisticated. They've got the tools. It's kind of a full-time business for them, not just a part of their business, and that's what they're doing. So what is IFOL doing to support the fight against fraud? What might people look for, the help that they need?
Shall I go first, Garry?
Carry on, Caroline. You go.
What IFOL's trying to do is things like today, conferences, webinars, research for our members, and it's about equipping businesses with the tools to identify fraud. Risk assessments. When was the last time you did a risk assessment? Have you got a response plan? All these different things. And if you think personally about what you receive on your phones on a daily basis, there's all these prizes that we win on a daily basis, or DPD have tried to deliver something that you haven't ordered. So you know personally how they're attacking you in your private life. So as a business, it's researching and keeping on top of what are the latest frauds, how how do we prevent against them, what can we do, and searching online for me, I'm always looking for freebies. So I'm always looking for free webinars like today, to link in with individuals and share experiences and talk to other people that are going through the same kind of things that you are. But the first thing I would do, as I've already said, is look at my internal controls first.
Okay.
Garry?
Yeah, well, I think within IFOL, I mean, as Caroline touched on, we're creating awareness. I mean, we've got digital summits like we're doing today. We've got the conferences, the UK, US, and Canada, regular webinars. We're always looking at research in terms of what we need to be advising our community in terms of fraud, the latest frauds that are affecting organisations. And then we've got the certification programs that I've been drafting. I've just completed one for a certified fraud specialist, and I'm currently working on a fraud risk manager course. So those two are in the pipeline and hopefully should be going live at some point soon. And then we've also got annual fraud updates, and we will have probably an annual webinar, as Caroline mentioned, something along the lines of what we're doing just now, so we can keep everyone abreast of things. And Caroline's working on an anti-fraud accreditation program as well at the moment, for organisations.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Did you mention that, Caroline?
No, Garry, I forgot
Would
to
you like to
mention
mention
that
it now?
key point, which I'll do now. One of the things that I'm working on is building an anti-fraud accreditation framework. And that's about understanding what best practices in finance operations and going through risk assessments to understand where you as a business are achieving or not achieving, and then providing a gap analysis whereby there might be a few things that need to be worked on to achieve accreditation, but it's understanding what best practice is, and that's just not AP or P2P. It could be R2R, order to cash, and AR. So that's something that we're working on at the moment.
because when you look at the poll that we've just done, and people just kind of feeling it's getting so sophisticated, they're working on it, they know what they're doing, it can be a little daunting to know which areas you should be looking at. So can you give us a flavour of some of the training that is useful for both companies and individuals to be aware of, the areas that your courses are looking at? Garry?
Yeah, well, I mean, the fraud specialist one really it's geared at P2P AP teams basically, and it's quite a detailed course. It covers all types of areas of fraud that they need to be aware of. I've mentioned internal and external fraud regulations, both in the US and the UK, and we can adapt the courses for other countries as well, such as Canada, for example. So it encompasses all areas that really need to be aware of within a fraud certification program. And it's not just there as an exam where you can, once you've done it, you can put it down. It's a reference document as well. So if you're looking for best practice and tips, it's all included within the course as well. The fraud risk manager, that's a little bit of a higher level. That's obviously within the title, it's a managerial type level, and it just takes things a little bit further from the specialist course in terms of regulations, types of fraud. AI is a big part of both courses in terms of even how you implement an AI project and bring software into your organization to combat the fraud. So there's all that type of thing. So it's quite a detailed courses. Yeah.
I think key to that as well is understanding about this doesn't sit with AP and P2P. This is about leadership and governance from the top down. So it's about that the business understands that it encompasses everybody, and everyone's got a part to play in keeping the business safe and secure and trying to minimize the opportunity for fraudsters to get in and steal, because at the end of the day, that is what they're trying to achieve. from the business. So it's a hierarchy of everyone within the business. So whilst Garry's courses might be aimed at various levels, it is about the total business being signed on to these things.
And when we're looking at some of the stuff you've mentioned, so an annual fraud update, I'm assuming that this is not the kind of thing that you can say, oh, we've done it, and that's good for another 12 months. It's like a spring clean. We're sorted now. We don't have to worry about things too much. So how does that work? People update it as they go along. It's a regular thing, and also, I'm sorry, it's a wide-ranging request. So is it like the old stuff, like procedures and protocols? You can't ignore those. They feed into all the new tools that there are. Can you just explain a bit how people will be using this stuff?
It's a continual process, so it's like a roadmap where you're continually looking and trying to improve things. So as a AP manager, you will know that you have got your documentation, your, like you say, your procedures, your controls, your policies, your business policies, which all feed into the infrastructure. And it's you will have dashboards with your KPIs, your KSRs, and obviously the financial statements of the business, which is quite important, which are indicators again of how the business is doing. So fraud and risk assessments is no different than any other part of the business. It's a continual evolving process. And every time there's a new fraud, you will be updating your controls, policies, and procedures to encompass that new type of fraud. What do you say, Garry?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's our part of our role in the education team to keep abreast of what's happening as well. I mean, nothing ever stands still, and obviously what we've covered already in fraud, you can see that it's a continually moving situation in terms of what's happening on both sides of the fence. So it's our role to really just keep things updated, and my part of my role within the certification programs is to make sure that the legislation is current. Any new legislation, or we've mentioned some already, that's introduced into the courses. Any new frauds, etc., are highlighted to our community and our members. And again, those can be done, those will be encompassed in the coursework, but we'll also have our webinars, etc., as well, in which we can deliver those to everybody. So we're always there helping our members, keeping everybody abreast of what's happening. And I also forgot to mention, we will be having some drop-in sessions as well for courses throughout the year. There's, I think it's second Thursday of every month. I might be wrong, but the dates are already out there. So that will cover all the courses that we're doing. So if people are doing the fraud course, for example, they've got some questions or whatever, I'll be there, or one of my colleagues, if I can't make it, to answer questions on that particular drop-in session.
Okay, so both of you dealing with the people that you do and running the courses, designing what people need to learn. Aside from the formal research, what are you coming across that people are coming across that they're really worried about, maybe that they've never come across before and they want to know a way of dealing with it? Are there any examples that you can think of in the last few months?
I think one of the things you cannot prevent is people clicking on links on I saw you wince then because we get it ourselves. Does it look like a real email address? Do I think this has come from a real person? And you have to trust your instincts. If your instincts are shouting out of you, it's better not to pay someone than to pay someone and then try and get the money back. No one minds if you stop, pause, and research, and then pay if you need to pay. So I think that's one of the hardest things, is putting things in place that if someone has pressed that link, what do your IT systems do in the background, or is there anything they can do? And again, simple training on phishing, and the standard spear attacks, and all the bog standard stuff that we get taught on our core training.
Garry, do you have anything to add to that? People asking you in particular about things?
No, I think Caroline touched on one of the key ones there, and I think strengthening training programs to improve fraud awareness across finance teams is really, really important. And I was quite interesting to see that the last poll, budget restraints wasn't really a big issue. So let's hope that there is some budget there for organisations to put into their training, because that's really, really important. I mean, even just a simple example that Caroline gave of people clicking on a link, if you've got proper training and awareness, that's something that a member of the staff should be aware not to do.
Yeah. And that's awareness throughout, isn't it? I mean, you can't.
Well, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's not just restricted.
To do that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the verifying bank details one that comes up in so many discussions. Sorry.
The best way to verify bank details, that is actually reflected in the survey as well. There's some information on that particular area.
Yeah. And it's surprising the number of businesses that don't make that phone call to verify bank details. I know that's not always easy, but there are other ways to verify, as in using software to check sort codes, IBANs, and etc.
And there's impersonation now through AI. You can easily impersonate your managing director, making either a phone call through voice recognition type approach, or even a video of the person saying, I want you to make a payment of $5 million to this company. This is a bank details.
But Gary, we can get around that, can't we, by having a no verbal instruction?
Well, I was just getting onto that, just to say that as part of the training, then that is exactly what we should be teaching the staff, under no circumstances accept that approach.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And before we move on, because we'll be talking about AI on another panel and how that's working and some examples just in a moment, but give us a flavour of the kind of training, the amount of time perhaps that people need to involve themselves with. I mean, are the courses flexible? Can they come along? Are they drop in? Can they just be an evening every so often, or a part of the day every so often? I know there's a huge range, but just give us a flavour of how much time perhaps people might need to devote to them.
To doing the exam side of things, Sue.
Just pick an example and give us a clue.
Well, the specialist fraud course. I mean, I've said to students, it's as long as how much time you can actually devote to doing your studies. And I do appreciate people are working; they've got the demands of work. Some organisations actually include some study time, which is great. And we had one organisation I spoke to last month who do get some study time as part of their day-to-day, but that's not always possible. Busy P2P, AP teams, it's not always possible. But I would say that to do yourself justice within the fraud specialist course, for example, you would be probably looking at around about 4 to 6 months to take the exam at the end. You've got to remember you could have 10 or 11 modules. So if you start module 1, you know, it's a long time if you're doing module 11, 3 or 4 months down the line to remember what you've been over in modules 1, 2, 3, etc. But it's everybody's pace, and there's no pressure on anybody to do it within a specific time. It's what you feel comfortable with, really. But I think if Caroline might touch on the accreditation program that we're doing, that's something that could be delivered to a team within a day, for example. Okay, so you're getting a lot of good best tips, best practice, all the things that you should know. Caroline is working on that at the moment. Probably be better.
Quick to add, Caroline, before we go?
It's still in its infancy at the moment, but for me, a best practice AP department should be investing in weekly training, and I would be looking for a minimum investment of an hour a week per employee. I don't think that's a big ask, really, and it shouldn't be looked upon as a cost. It should be looked upon as an investment and a prevention, and you're keeping hold of the company's assets at the end of the day, and that's what they're there to do. So minimum one hour a week, I don't think is a big ask.
Thanks very much indeed. And of course, we've talked about the community. You rely on information coming into you as well as putting information out there for people to make use of, don't you? And just to remind you, you can sign up for an IFOL free account today or upgrade to a premium and get even more information from it. The link will appear in the chat. Thanks to Caroline Adams and Garry Stevens. Thanks for joining us today.